Hello again. In 2009 and 2010, there was a most frightful fuss among home-educated parents in Britain when an inquiry by a man called Graham Badman led to a law being framed that would lead to a register for home-educated children. In the event, the election of 2010 caused this to be dropped. Now, though, the idea has been revived, and the experience of the pandemic means that this time it will go through without a hitch. The government have found that they can impose curfews, close churches, forbid people to have their family round for Christmas dinner without anybody opposing them, and they now know that they can do whatever they like. No need to pass a new law, just amend an old one by statutory order, and there are no long arguments and debates about the thing. It's simply done with a stroke of a pen. As I've said before, I did not send my daughter to school for a single day. I simply taught her myself. In Britain, one does not need to seek anybody's permission for this or tell anybody at all what you're doing. You simply don't send your child to school when he or she is 5. This is because the relevant law, the 1996 Education Act, says the parents of every child of compulsory school age shall cause him to receive efficient full-time education suitable to his age, ability and aptitude, and to any special educational needs he may have, either by regular attendance at school or otherwise. I give a link to this legislation in the description to this video. This is a duty laid on the parents, not the state. It is not the state's business to cause a child to be educated. It's the legal responsibility of the child's parents. I had a duty, when my daughter reached 5, to see that she received an efficient full-time education, and it was nothing at all to do with the state. The state didn't need to concern itself with what I was doing. I was obeying the law and fulfilling my duty, and that was all there was to it. I didn't tell anybody what I planned to do, because it was nobody's business but mine. Even if you decide to send your child to school, the responsibility for seeing that she receives an efficient education remains yours as the parent. It is not the school's responsibility, nor that of the state. All that is about to change because the government are taking advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic to push through a change in the law, one which will remove responsibility from parents for their child's education and hand it instead to the state. Just as the government was able to impose some shocking restrictions on our liberty by amending little-known laws like the 1984 Public Health Act, Parliament not needed for that. This means that there will be no need for the Education Secretary to try and bring in a new law to curb home education. He will simply add a paragraph to the 1996 Education Act. We can be fairly sure this is what he's planning to do, because he said that he's going to be introducing this register imminently. He couldn't say that if it was a law that was being planned. It won't be anything but imminent. He's simply going to alter the existing laws. This is a serious matter affecting not only home-educated children. It will at once alter the status of every single child in Britain and remove responsibility for them and their education from parents and give it to the state. The state will now be able to say what sort of education a child receives, and wishes of the state will override that of the parents. It will not be enough anymore for parents to ensure that their child is given an efficient education. It will have to be a state-approved education. For example, I wanted my child to be taught about God and religious duties, not just secular law. I wanted her to realise that she didn't only have an obligation to obey the law of the land, but that there was also a higher law, there was a divine law that had to be followed. Perhaps this sounds like religious extremism to some people, but it was, I felt, better than some of the stuff being pushed onto children in schools. The government, though, expressly want every child now to be taught about transsexualism, homosexuality, anti-racism, climate change, and a whole host of other things which some of us are a little dubious about. As things stand, we can simply avoid sending our children to school if we want to avoid this. Once the state take over, though, it is entirely possible, I would even say probable, that permission to educate your child at home will be made conditional on their learning certain things at home. I'm not talking about reading and writing or doing sums. Educationists don't worry these days about all that kind of old-fashioned stuff. No, the worry will be that a child might be being radicalised or exposed to racism, not taught about sex change operations, that kind of thing. In other words, home education will end up not something which any parent can automatically do, as I did, without asking anybody's permission, but rather a privilege that can be withdrawn at any time if somebody from the local authority or central government feels that you're not indoctrinating your child into modern ideas about sex, race and gender. This is really a serious matter because in the next few months the government in Britain will, without any debate in Parliament, change forever the nature of childhood in this country. Children will become in effect the wards of the state, and their education will be legally dictated, whether they're at school or at home.